Okay, we're live. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this night's edition of Sappy Hour. And if this is your first ever Sappy Hour and you don't know what it is, it's basically a happy hour with a nod to the yellow-bellied sapsucker, where we talk about all sorts of things related to the third Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas. The format goes like this. We'll have a relatively short presentation on a particular Atlas topic. Tonight it's point counts, which we'll explain in a little bit. And then during or after that, you can put all of your questions about the topic at hand or actually about anything to do with the Breeding Bird Atlas to our panel of experts, who are all the people around me here on the screen. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a back and forth. You may be joining us from one of two mediums though tonight. So we'll do a little bit of technical housekeeping before we get into anything else. If you are here with us in Zoom webinar, I just want to say that you are not in a Zoom meeting. So that just means that your camera and microphone have been completely disabled and there is no option to turn them on. So you can just relax. You're not accidentally on camera, which is great for some people. However, you can still interact with us and we still can hear from you and answer your questions. So you may notice if you hover at either the top or bottom of your screen that there are two functions. There's a Q&A function, among many others, and a chat function. If you have a question that relates to the subject matter that we're covering, the Atlas, and in particular point counts, please put that in the Q&A tab on Zoom. If you have something else that you want to say, like hello, or share a story that happened to you while atlasing, or if you want us to help you with like technical aspects of joining, please put that in the chat function. So it's a little bit different. If you happen to be joining us from Facebook tonight, it's a lot easier. We'll take all of your questions and comments and everything else just in the comment section of the video that we're streaming from. Yeah, so I think that's basically it. We'll answer other questions as they come up about some of the technical aspects. But tonight, we haven't had a Sappy Hour in a while, and maybe your questions, your burning questions have been building up, I don't know. But our topic, our official topic, is about point counts. And point counts are, unless you are a bird surveyor, something that might be a new topic to a lot of you if you've been a casual birder and you haven't done any surveys. However, even if you are a really seasoned atlaser or you've done a lot of avian surveys, please do stay tuned because there are some brand new and very exciting aspects of point counting for Atlas 3 that you will not want to miss tonight. And I do want to say that given that our topic is a little bit technical today, don't worry, it's being recorded. The recording of this session will be available. We'll send it out through email if you're joining us through Zoom, and it's posted as well on the Atlas Facebook page as well. So yeah, I think all that's left is for me to do some introductions. So we have our regular Atlas Sappy Hour panel. I'll just mention the three of their names and maybe they can just wave. We've got Kaylin, who's I think the assistant coordinator of the Atlas. This is the section where I butcher everybody's title. We've got Mike Cadman, who's the Atlas coordinator. You've seen him before. And we have Mike Burrell, who's the head of the Significant Species Committee, I hope, and on a number of other committees and a regional coordinator and very involved. We have two new faces though, as well, very exciting. First, I'm going to talk about Charles Francis. Charles, would you mind just waving as we talk here? Okay. Charles is the manager of wildlife monitoring and assessment at the Canadian Wildlife Service. And he's also the chair of the Atlas Analysis and Design Working Group. He literally wrote the book / manual on point counting. So we're in very good hands with his presentation on that topic tonight. He's a longtime atlaser and his experience of atlasing goes far beyond Atlas 3. We're also joined by Rich Russell, who's about to wave to you as well. Thanks, Rich. Rich is also with the Canadian Wildlife Service as a wildlife biologist, and he's on several Atlas committees as well, including the Technical Committee, the Significant Species Committee, say that 10 times fast, it's hard to do, and the Far North Subcommittee. So yeah, with that, we look forward to all of your comments and questions, but I think I'm going to hand it over to Charles to actually tell you about point counts.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for the introduction. And I think I pressed enough buttons to be sharing my screen. Always miss one or two on the way.
You have?
So
yeah.
I'm going to tell you about point counts and what are point counts. Here's the one-page summary, what a point count is. It's the most important method that we currently have for estimating the relative abundance of most land birds. And it involves standing at a predetermined spot for a few minutes. In the atlas case, it's typically 5 minutes, and counting all the birds you can see or hear during that time. There's a few details, we'll get back to those. It's done in the early morning during the breeding season, so late May until early July, and the first few hours of the morning. And why are they important? They let us to look at relative abundance across the province. They can be used to determine how populations are changing over time. And with some exciting recent statistical developments, we can actually use them to estimate the total population size of the different bird species in Ontario or Canada or North America, depending where we have point count data from. So just a few examples from Atlas 2. You can see here, for example, is barn swallow. It looks like it occurred just about everywhere that we did atlasing, if you just look at the presence-absence maps, the breeding evidence map. But if you look at the relative abundance map up in the top right here, you can see that the density of barn swallows is actually much higher in some parts of the province than others. We can't get that just from the breeding evidence, we can get that from point counts. And just scroll back through, we had 68,000 point counts in the second atlas. I think might be a challenge to match that this time, but you know, it's a challenge we're going to put forth for everybody. Here's a few more examples of relative abundance maps, just showing that they give us a lot of information on where in the province each species is most abundant. And as I said, we can use them to estimate population size and trends. So here's an example of population trends from the Breeding Bird Survey, which is basically a point count survey for those of you who have done one. Those who haven't, maybe when you're done with the atlas, we can recruit some new BBSers. But the BBS involves doing 50 point counts on a predetermined route along the roadside. There's only a limited number of routes in Ontario. They do give us information on trends, but if you look at the Canada-wide trend, for example, wood thrush, you can see that the confidence limits, that's the difference between our best upper and lower limit, are much narrower than they are for Ontario because of the big sample size. We're going to fix that with the Ontario Atlas. We're going to get so many point counts that we're going to have really good information on what's still happening to wood thrushes. Is this 20-year, looks like it's been reasonably stable. Is that still happening? Or is it actually still continuing to decline, as suggested a bit by the more recent data? So we'll be able to compare second atlas with third atlas on point counts. And of course, for all the other species that we get good data. I mentioned estimating population size. Many of you have probably seen this 3 billion birds lost paper that came out, or seen the media that came with it. That was based on using conversion factors, estimating detectability with distance sampling. We'll mention that briefly in today's talk, to figure out how many birds are represented on a point count, what's the probability of detecting them, and extrapolating that up. That's how we got 3 billion. We knew that the decline had been 30%, but how many birds does that represent? And I could tell you the messaging, the impact on conservation excitement, that right word for a loss of so many birds, concern maybe is the right word, is so much bigger when you can say we've lost 3 billion birds, and when you say it's gone down 30%. People don't really understand what that means. When you can convert it to a number, they do. And so we are hoping to get more information out of that. So one of the exciting things about the new atlas, and it's a recent development elsewhere, not yet on the Breeding Bird Survey, is that we're going to have traditional point counts, and we'll tell you about those. That's where a really good birder goes out and can identify all their birds and count them just as they stand there. We're also doing digital point counts that allow people who are less experienced at identifying birds by song, who, when they hear the warbler say, I think that's a warbler, but I have no idea which one. Then you can do these recordings, and then we'll get experts to listen to these recordings, and we'll tell you a bit more about that as I go through, at least how to make them. We're not going to tell you a lot today. That's another topic on how you actually listen to interpret those recordings. So most of the atlas point counts are on roadsides, and just showing you here a map. If you haven't downloaded an atlas map, you should for your square. If you downloaded one a couple weeks ago, you might want to re-download them because some of them have updates. We've made some corrections on a few point counts, so you may want to go get a fresh copy, especially for the off-road points. But this shows a whole bunch of numbered point counts. In this case, there's 40 that were pre-randomly selected on roadsides. The instructions are to pick the first 20 that you can, but if some of these early ones happen to be on, the 401 or some other highway where you really shouldn't be doing point counts, please throw those ones out and choose a different one that's not on an overly busy road. I think we might have eliminated 401 from our point counts, but sometimes roads are just too busy to be safe, but we don't know that when we do the sampling. So pick the first 20 that you can, get out there. There's also some roadsides. Uh-oh, sorry, got a phone call ringing. Somebody caught it. Nope. Sorry, I just have to shut up the phone. It'll probably ring back in a minute on me, but I'll try. So one of the things we're doing on this atlas that we did not do in the last atlas is when you hear birds singing, you record what you hear in the first 3 minutes, and then separately you keep track of what you first hear in the second 2 minutes. This is part of that detectability I talked about trying to convert our counts into numbers of birds. It also helps us link the breeding bird survey data with the breeding bird atlas data. So here's a sample of how you might write down your data. Little 4-letter codes, good to know your 4-letter codes. First 3 minutes, I heard 2 robins, and I heard a third robin, a new robin in the last 2 minutes. You only record the new birds you heard. This particular example, almost half the birds only showed up in the last 2 minutes. That's not usually what happens in a point count, but it could happen. And there were 2 of them that you had confirmed breeding evidence for, so you jot that down here as well. You don't need to write down the breeding evidence on a point count if it's just singing or a suitable habitat. We'll just assume that if it's a point count. You can also enter these data through the app. Now, I think you've probably seen a bit of messaging. The app's still going through a growing pain, but we think it's almost ready there. Only use the app to record data in the field if you're really good with your fingers and can type quickly. You don't want to spend your time hunting for the species and not listening to all the birds as they sing. So a lot of people, I think, will still write them down in a notebook, and then you can enter it in the app after you've done your point count. It's up to you. If you're a younger generation than me and your fingers just fly across that app, or if you've been entering stuff on eBird real time really quickly, go ahead and use the app to enter your data live on point counts. But you don't want to spend too much time fiddling with the data entry while during that 5-minute period. Otherwise, all your birds will be in those last 2 minutes because you were too busy fiddling with your fingers in the first 3 minutes. So there's a sophisticated version, an advanced version that gives us even more information for detectability. But if you're just starting out in point counts, don't try this one. It's an extra level of confusion. You can work up to this one. We don't need all of our point counts done this way. And this is where we try to separate which birds are in the, within 50 meters of you, the closest birds, how many are 50 to 100, and how many are more than 100. And that really helps us to estimate densities. We don't need it, as I said, for every point count, but the more we get, the more accurate we'll be able to estimate our densities. And again, we still separate the first 3 minutes, last 2 minutes. There's 2 ways to write that down. One is just with more columns. And the other, which is a way that a lot of point counters do if they're used to this, is you actually draw a little map and you just write down, okay, there was a Vesper sparrow here, there was a northern flicker here, and you underline the ones that were only in the last 2 minutes. So there's 2 different ways to do this. This is all in the instruction manual. You don't have to memorize it looking at it now, just let people know. But again, if you're just a beginner to point counts, start with the simple and then work your way up to the distance sampling as you get more experienced. Good idea to use the 4-letter codes. Good idea to use the official 4-letter codes that are in the manual. If you happen to make up your own, as long as you know what it is, when you go to data entry, check the species name, make sure it matches. That's okay too. But it's a fairly straightforward rule. First couple letters of each part of the name, if it's a 2-part name, and so on. The only exceptions, there's a few duplicates. You can look those up in the manual. Sometimes 2 species have the same 2 letters of each part of their name. But again, as long as you know what you saw and you enter it into the web or the app quickly before you forget, that's okay too. So off-road point counts, I mentioned roadside. Most of the points we want are roadside. We want 20 from each square for roadside if it's got roads in the square. Roadless is a different question. And we want some off-road point counts. And circled here in blue is the number of off-road points we would like in each square. In this particular square, we've asked for 4 in broadleaf forest and 1 in mixed forest. The reason for that is that detectabilities and densities of birds are not the same on roadsides as they are in the habitat away from the road. And these off-road points will really help us get much better density estimates than just using roadsides. So they're a lot more work. We still want lots of roadside points because they give us a lot of trend information, but these off-roads will help a lot for density estimation. The number of roadside and off-road points will vary among squares. In a place like Algonquin, you might see clusters of these, or in the north. If possible, the ones that are shown here, I forgot to mention, are ones that were done in the Atlas 2. If possible, we'd love you to repeat those ones. But if you can't, if it's private land, you can't figure out where it was, you can't access it, just try to get to some other suitable habitat that matches the requisite here. This has more than that. It's bonus if you can do all of the ones that we're done in the second Atlas as a repeat. Easier in places like Algonquin Park where it's public land, you can get there. Somebody successfully did it last time, so you may be able to navigate it. If it's private land, do make sure you get permission before you go there, or go choose other areas with the right habitat. We don't need to have every Atlas 2 point repeated. You'll also notice that in this case, there aren't 40 different points. It's because there weren't enough roads. There's still just enough that we can get the 20 roadside points, but in some squares there won't be, in which case we want more off-road points. If you download the square summary sheet, you can see the same information. We want 20 roadside, 4 broadleaf, 1 mixed forest. This is the same square I showed earlier. And if you want to get the details of those points, the coordinates, if you want to put them into your GPS, people can tell you about the details of that, or into your phone with a phone app that does GPS. Go to the Atlas website. You can download the Atlas Square, the maps that I just showed you. You can download the points in different formats, CSV. If you're putting it into a Garmin, you want a GPX, Google Earth, KML, choose the version. There's instructions on the website. I think there's some videos to show you how to do it. Just as an example, the CSV format, which looks like a heck of a lot of numbers. Again, it's designed for something else like computer to read rather than you. But here it shows all the roadside points that have the numbers 1 to 21. This shows the off-road points that were done in Atlas 2. You, of course, can do your own off-road points for Atlas 3 if the Atlas 2 ones aren't accessible or there aren't enough of them. So, yeah, just more details. This is just a link to the Atlas website showing there's a whole bunch of training videos, how to do this, how to get your Atlas maps into Google Maps, all of this. I'm not going to talk about the details. You can look them up. And I'm going to let Rich, I'm going to stop sharing here and talk a bit about recorded point counts and using a Zoom H2N. Should I stop sharing and or can people see Rich at the same time? Probably stop sharing.
I think so, yeah.
Yep. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so for a long time now, Canadian Wildlife Service and parks and MNR have been using these fancy audio recorders that are programmed, they're automatic. They'll come on at a certain date and a certain time and record a point count. And you can leave them there all season if you want. They can record point counts many times in a season. You can't attach a summer student to a tree and expect them to do that and not complain. So that technology has been great for many of our research projects. But for this project, for the Atlas, and for projects where we're going to many different sites in a day, these handheld audio recording units, this particular brand and model, the Zoom H2N, has been quite reliable and successful for us. We've provided kits to all the regional coordinators that have a protective case, the recording unit itself, and a little flexible tripod that you can attach to branches or trees or rocks or whatever. And it's a standard tripod mount, so you can use your own tripod if you're standing on a road, for example. There's going to be a video, and there's that slide that Charles showed just before is a cheat sheet. It shows you some of the equipment adjustments and settings, and then some of the steps that you should follow when you're doing it. I just encourage you to always make sure you have that cheat sheet with you, because there are a couple of buttons that are not difficult to accidentally move out of the ideal setting. It's also good before you do your point count that you have, as Charles mentioned, you've got your GPS unit or your GPS app on your phone ready so that you know the square number you're in, you know the point number you're at, if it's a designated point, or you know the latitude, longitude, or UTM for the off-road point if it's not already designated on the map. There's a couple of things in here that right in the middle part of the cheat sheet that ask you to say, to announce where you are, who you are, when, what the date and time is, and the location if it's not a designated point. And I'd just like to emphasize that what the WildTrack system will do after you've uploaded your recordings is it has a speech to text converter so that it can automatically register the latitude, longitude, and the date and time you know, of your recording, so that it can georeference and timestamp. But it's going to be extra important that you enunciate clearly and slowly so that none of those important details about where and when get garbled. So there will be on the video, I'll demonstrate that, and there's reminders in this. And then there's details about how to log on and upload your files after that. Okay, so all that stuff's easy, but I'd just like to point out that the most challenging part, you might think of this as that's the hard part, is setting it up and pressing record, and then you can go stand away. But really, that's the most challenging part, is being quiet for 5 minutes during bug season when there's you might be standing on a gravel road. Any of those sounds that you make, even just if you're brushing bugs away, and the sound of your raincoat or your Gore-Tex coat causes pretty annoying sounds when you're listening on the other end, and so do bodily sounds too. So don't go recording on an empty stomach. Make sure there's nothing, no stomach rumblings, and don't eat chili the night before you go recording. Anyway, those are just some reminders. Like I say, there'll be a cheat sheet that you can download and a video you can watch to get the idea. And that's it. Pretty easy.
Thanks, Rich. Did we have another slide or two? I've forgotten.
Well, if you're done, Charles, yeah, if you could share again. We actually, if you're done with your presentation and Rich is done with his, we wanted to kind of poll the audience a little bit at this stage to see what they remembered.
I think I shared the wrong screen.
I think you've shared us. We're within a screen.
Yeah, let me fix that. Stop share. Something moved when I was trying to share. Share screen. Nope, it's keeps moving things around. Let me try a different approach. It was the right screen when I started.
If not, we'll just do it kind of verbally. That's okay.
Yeah, I will get it. Is that sharing the right thing?
It's sharing the cheat sheet.
Yeah, good.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and there were just a couple more slides to go. As Rich said, there will always be a few funny noises on your recordings, but one of the reasons we asked you to step 5 meters away is so that it's not so loud, and the fewer the better. But it's not that onerous. Minimum coverage goals, just a reminder, we're trying to get point counts basically in all of the squares in the dark green, 5% in the pale green, and 2% up here. Of course, we'd love to get more, especially in the pale green. Basically any square that gets covered in these upper areas, we hope to get point counts, but we know we won't get full coverage in all of them. And just the standard thank you here. Lots of different partners on the Atlas. I'm sure you see this at all of these Sappy hours. And all of you, I hope, know where the website is. So quiz time.
Yeah, let's get to some quizzes. What I'm going to do, if you're okay with it, Charles, is I'm going to launch the poll that we have here. I'm just going to give some instructions for Zoom and Facebook first. And then once it's closed and we share the results, maybe you can reveal the right answer. Does that sound okay? So I'm just going to launch this first poll here. How many times, just to see if you guys are paying attention, how many times does a single point count location need to be surveyed? So if you're joining us through Zoom right now, there is a poll that just popped up on your screen, and you can kind of click your response anonymously, which is great if you're worried about, you know, getting one wrong. No one knows who you are. If you are watching through Facebook, just pop your answer that you think, you know, is the correct one into the comment section of the video as well, because we don't have a poll function for you, but we do want to know what you think the correct answer is. Please do vote. We have 120 people here on Zoom webinar. I can see that around 85% of them have voted already. So I'm gonna close the polling in 3 seconds, 2, 1. And I'm going to share the results. The vast majority of people think it's that they have to do their point counts, each point count once per atlas. Charles?
That's right. That's our priority. Now, we won't refuse data that are done more often, but our target is to get every point count, you know, every square with 25 point counts in those areas. And so it's more important to go to a new square, a new location than to repeat a point count.
For the real point count enthusiasts, I guess, who just can't,
yeah.
They run out of
points. And if somebody
that...
wants to do 45 in a square, you know, all 40 on the roadside plus all the off-road, we'll use the data, but we want to make sure that you don't do that instead of all the other squares.
That is very good advice. Okay, let's go to the next one then.
Oops, sorry.
Okay,
I
people
just
did pretty
answered
well.
that one.
Oh, that's okay. Let's see if they were paying attention. We're going to launch it anyway, and we'll just see how many roadside point counts, we'll see how sharp you are required per square, assuming sufficient roads. And Charles, I think you were saved by the fact that you said slightly the wrong number. I'll reveal that after. So yeah, if you're on Facebook, we are watching. I see that Ken McKean has voted, which is great, and Lauren Niche, which is great. And so is everybody here on Zoom. We're going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And these guys are doing pretty well, right, Charles? I think you said 25 instead of 20, so it wasn't a total.
I didn't say roadside. I said 25 point counts because it's 5 off-road and 20 roadside. You weren't paying attention.
I wasn't paying. I guess I'm just going to claim that I was doing the polling and I wasn't paying attention because of that.
Uh-oh, we just answered this one.
Well, again, let's see. Some people are getting them wrong. So I think there is a small minority who can maybe use the reminder, although it's great that people are actually getting them right. How closely have you been paying attention to us revealing the answers of all of the polls, everybody? What's the minimum number of off-road point counts required per square, assuming that there are sufficient roads? I can see there's a few votes coming in on Facebook. People seem to be in sync here. Okay, I'm going to close the polling in 3, 2, 1. Again, extremely confident, correct answer, right?
Yeah, that's good.
Let's see, do we have one more? Yes. Okay, we haven't revealed the answer to this one, everybody. This is going to be a really good one to end on. I'm going to launch this poll. How many distance bands are required for a point count? I can already see that this one, Charles, is a lot more neck and neck as people's votes roll in, so that's a good thing. And yeah, don't forget to vote on Facebook as well. Okay. So this one's a little bit more of a head scratcher for everybody. There's the option of either 3, 2, or no distance bands. I am going to end polling and share the results. It seems like around half of the people, for those of you on Facebook tuning in, said that there are none. Around 41% said that there are 3, and 9% said that there are 2. Charles, you want to reveal the answer?
Well, the technical correct answer, if you look at the word required, is none, because it's not required to do distance bands. But the 3 is a pretty good answer, because if you're doing distance bands, the correct answer is 3. 2 is a suboptimal answer because we don't have that as an option under data entry. It's either 0 or 3. So 3 bands, meaning 0 to 50, 50 to 100, or more than 100. So yeah, there's 2 boundaries, but that makes 3 different distance bands.
Go. And you did mention that not everybody, needs to do their point counts this way. So maybe we have a number of questions that are rolling in, and the rest of the panel can kind of join us as you stop sharing your screen. But maybe we can start off by talking about, how important it is that people do use those bands if they are able to do so, or whether it's, purely optional. How much are you stressing that for the Atlas?
I think we would really like people who are experienced to be doing distance bands, but if you're relatively new to point counts, having to worry about distance bands and time bands and identifying all those songs can actually impact your point count because you're too busy worrying about distance band to be paying attention to the birds. So I would recommend that you only start doing distance bands when you're really confident in other aspects of point counts. We would, any professional crews that we hire, we expect they'll be doing distance bands. If you do distance bands, make sure you practice estimating distance, because that's another challenge. Pace out 50 meters and 100 meters on a roadside. Roadside points are the best place to start it, because there's things like telephone poles that have certain spacing, not necessarily 50 meters. Figure out the spacing and use those to learn to judge. See where, oh, the bird's in that tree. I can't see it, but I can I think it sounds like it's coming from that tree, and use that to estimate distance. Off-road, it is much more challenging. And so don't start there unless you've already done a bunch of point counts.
One other kind of related question. This is my question. So guys, one of the great things about moderating these is I just get to sneak my question in first because I don't actually get to put it in text. I'm curious if the Atlas accounts for the fact that, that perceived distance is going to change depending on the habitat that you're in, and also depending on the species that you're listening to. We know that certain birds, like oven birds, are a lot louder than others, for instance. So does the Atlas take that into account, or do they just kind of trust the Atlaser to do their best estimate of which bird is where?
Basically, we trust the Atlaser to do their best estimate. Errors on individual birds don't matter that much, but a systematic error where you always underestimate certain species, that's not ideal. It is always tricky to estimate distance by sound alone. That's why if you practice on roadsides, you can often sort of estimate where the bird is, like it's in that tree. It's much easier to estimate distance visually than it is by sound. And so, don't do distance bands on your breeding bird survey, but do distance bands if you're up to it and experienced. It's a challenging technique, but people have found that that's what allows us to estimate densities. Because for species that don't call very loud, almost all the birds will be in the first 50 meters, only a few beyond that. And so we estimate what are actual, you're not counting birds 100 meters away for a golden crown kinglets, but you might be counting birds 100 meters away for ovenbirds, and we need that correction factor to estimate densities.
That's great. Okay, we'll take our next question, our first real question from a viewer. This one comes from Facebook, and Rich, maybe you're the right person to answer this one. It says, somebody's just curious about what kind of a battery the recording device uses and how long it would last in different conditions.
That's an excellent question, and why I always recommend having an extra pair of AA batteries. These units are great because, yeah, there's just a battery, cover on the back, and yeah, they just take AA's. So that's a pretty good selling feature for them. And these units, if you wanted to buy your own, you can get them at any music shop. They're pretty popular. Zoom makes a lot of audio equipment for music stores. So if you go to Long McQuaid, for example, you can get these for $200 or $220.
And just to add to that, I've recorded a breeding bird survey route over 5 hours continuous with a pair of AA batteries. So if you're turning them on and off, you'll easily get through 2 or 3 squares. If you forget to turn it off, the battery will go down faster.
That makes a lot of sense. This is a great question. I'm not sure who is the best person to answer it. Maybe Mike Cadman can start us off or direct it to the right person if he's not them. If someone wants to know, if you do like one of these Zoom point counts, Is there any way to see what the results are once the expert birders have kind of gone through the recordings, if you're curious about what was in the places that you surveyed?
Oh, I'm going to punt that back to Charles.
I
Awesome.
could see that coming. The answer is there will be. We still have to work out the details, but we're going to be uploading it to a platform called Wild Tracks, and we'll be releasing some information shortly on how to practice point counts on Wild Tracks. But you'll also be able to go in and see the point counts that you yourself interpreted, collected by finding the ones by Atlas Square. Of course, there aren't any there now yet, so we still have to work out some details. But one way to do it is to say you're going to sign up to interpret them, but you actually just go see what other people did and see their results. I think we will make that an option. We still have to work out that detail. But yes, we know people will be interested in that, and so we will make sure that's available. But don't expect that instantly, because all those experts who will be interpreting them for us are going to spend the summer doing real point counts, and then we're going to get them to interpret in the fall and the winter when there's less real birding to do.
So by the year after, the person who kind of lives or birds in that area can get some information that will inform their birding for the next season, maybe. Okay, somebody else wants to know, aside from habitat type, which is something that you kind of covered, can you give some general advice on picking off-road point count sites?
Sure, I'll take that one as well. Ideally, we'd pick them randomly, but we know that it's so hard to tell what areas you have access to. So what we recommend you do is you use the Atlas Square maps that show habitats. You look at the habitat, say deciduous forest, you find a patch of deciduous forest in your square that you're pretty sure you can get into. We'd love you to get off-road for atlasing anyway, because you're going to find species you can't find from the roadside. So find areas that you think you can get access to, but please choose your points ahead of time. Don't wait. Oh, I hear a morning warbler. It's time to do a point count. Wrong approach. You have to choose your point ahead of time. You go there and then you start your point count. And otherwise you get it biased towards the most interesting species. Of course, write down that morning warbler for your breeding evidence, but don't specifically choose your point count because there's a morning warbler or a golden winged warbler or something singing. Choose your points ahead of time. So it's a bit of flexibility. Look at your map, find what looks like a good patch of habitat that you can get into, and off you go.
That is good advice. Good reminder that you can just put interesting birds into the atlas and you don't need to, organize point counts around them too. Can somebody, again, I'm gonna leave it to Mike to tell me who should answer the question best, but people are curious from a few places just about how point counts are assigned and how whether they should kind of go through their regional coordinator and whether they should request point counts. So can somebody just talk through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. The regional coordinators are key in this. They're going to be sort of managing the point counts that get done in the region. So if you want to do point counts in the square, please contact the regional coordinator, let them know of your interest. There's going to be situations where someone's already said they'll do the point counts in that square, and there may be ways of working things out with that person. If we run into situations like this, maybe the principal atlaser in the square has already said they'll do the point count, they'll do the first 20. But if there are 40 points that have been designated in that square, maybe you could do some of the ones with the higher numbers to complement the work that the principal atlas has already done. But work it out with the regional coordinators, because we don't want to find a few squares that have got all the points done and then right next door is another square that doesn't have any done. So that's really the key thing.
That's fair. Are there any regions that you know of, maybe the answer is no, that that the regional coordinators are looking for point counters at this moment? Maybe just a few places people can start looking, or maybe not.
Yeah, it's very much population based. All the regions that have small populations are going to be very keen to have people come and help them with point counts. So everything on the Canadian Shield, sort of everything I would say from Barrie on north, from Peterborough on north, we're going to struggle to get all those squares done. And we're hoping people out there will do a lot of do the digital point counts with the Zoom recorders as well. So we can get people who wouldn't normally be able to do point counts doing them that way. But yeah, areas, anywhere in the north or in that central part of the province, it's going to be fairly easy to find a square to do points in. and we'll be definitely targeting those over the latter years of the project. In the south, though, areas like Grey County, Huron, Perth, even parts of Dufferin, they can be a long way from population centers, and so at this point don't have people assigned to do point counts in them. So certainly talk to the regional coordinators in those kind of areas. But you can look at the coverage map. There's a coverage map on the website. If you haven't seen that, really encourage people to have a look at that. You can see which squares have been assigned to a principal atlaser, and that's probably a pretty good indication of whether someone's lined up to do point counts in it, although it's not definite. But you can see some squares that aren't, and if they aren't assigned, then there's really nobody lined up to do point counts in there. So that would be one to talk to. Those squares we want to talk to the coordinators about.
That's great. And this is a good time to remind everybody that at the moment, given that we're at a stay-at-home order, this might not be the exact moment, month, week that you want to kind of go out looking for places outside of your kind of home location to look for unatlased or non-squares that don't have point counters. However, keep in mind, like we quizzed everybody, you have to do these point counts once in 5 years. So there is a lot of time to do that travel outside of your home region in order to get those done.
Okay. I'm going to pick up a question that I was going to say I've seen a question repeated several times in the Q&A, so I thought I'd pick up on that one, which is, where do you get the coordinates for the off-road points? The answer is that if you go to that website, and I pointed out where you can download coordinates, it also has the coordinates for the off-roads that were done in Atlas 2. Obviously, if you're choosing new locations, you have to provide those coordinates. We don't give them to you. But all the coordinates for both the roadside and the Atlas 2 off-road points are in those download files. And so, yeah, they're not shown on the PDF map, but you can download either that text version, CSV, if you're going to read it yourself, or if the computer is going to read it, you download the Garmin version or the Google Earth version. Again, instructions for how to put it into your phone or GPS are elsewhere on the website. But all of those coordinates are there. Can you do more than 5 off-road point counts? Yes, you can. You can do as many as you want to. We'll accept them as long as you do the data entry. And there was also a question about, submitting data at the end of the season. Ideally, all of your data, point counts, and your checklists, because we don't do a square summary this time around. We do individual. Each time you go out, you do a checklist of all the species you picked up. Submit those as soon as you can. Ideally, use the app or the website. Submit them the end of the day so that you don't forget what you're doing when you can't figure out your 4-letter code 3 months later because you used the wrong one. You're more likely to remember the same day if you enter it. I know from experience.
That's fair. And yeah, kind of similarly, there have been a few things on Facebook as well, Charles, just about whether or not it's preferable to complete all of your point counts as early as possible, just to make sure that they're done and maybe do point counts elsewhere, or whether you'd like them kind of spread out over the time of the Atlas. Can you speak to that?
In theory, it's nice to spread them out. In practice, it's not a bad idea to get them done when you can, because then if you have the chance to go atlasing further north or somewhere else in some of our big gap areas, that's great too. There's a good accessibility question here that I think is a really good one to answer. Somebody who can't actually get off-road. Yeah, we're happy to let you do your roadside point counts and let your regional coordinator know. Maybe somebody else can go and do some of the off-road points. There's nothing magic about square ownership. We'd love to have people contributing data from anywhere you can. If you like to do point counts and the neighbor who's managing a square doesn't like point counts, maybe you can trade off there and do extra point counts in somebody else's square. So.
Fair. One really kind of interesting question that Burke Coral, hi Burke, just asked in Zoom webinar is just about any studies that you might know of that compare detectability between kind of humans and the recording units. I know that there have been a lot of studies done. Yeah, it'd be good to know.
There are quite a few published studies. We should probably share some of that information later. I don't have it at my fingertips, but there have been a number of studies. Basically, what we find is that if you get a couple of experts with a good quality recording, and I will say, please use recommended recorders, because we've found it does not work as well with some of the Zoom H2N is is one version that's really nice because it records in both directions. So it really gives you the same surround sound that you get with your own ears. We've had some where people use even the Zoom H4n, which is much more sophisticated, more expensive. It's very directional. It doesn't pick up sounds as well in the opposite direction. But if you have a good recorder like that, or some of these ARUs that Rich showed, you get the same number of species. Of course, you don't count turkey vultures very well, but you count most of the other species just as well. And so it's quite effective. And in fact, if you get several people listening really closely, you often get higher counts on the recorders, because when you're out there listening, there's always a few things calling that you don't notice. They're a bit further away, they were a bit quiet, they sang at the same time as somebody else. When you have a recording, you can listen to it twice or three times and, yeah, I missed that first time through. But on average, it works out pretty equal, and we can adjust for any small differences. Except for turkey vultures. We can't do those on recordings.
It's probably also worth pointing out that at the University of Alberta, where the Biomonitoring Institute is, that's hosting the Wild Tracks system where all these recordings are going, they're every year they're doing comparison studies of with these essentially like a signboard with 5 different kinds of recording units, all attached to the same post, so that they can then do comparisons of how loudly or what the sound density is for a particular bird, or live birds, and also broadcast sounds of birds from certain distances, so that a lot of those comparisons can be incorporated in the modeling after the fact.
Thanks, Rich. One question that Mike Burrell actually flagged, because he thought it was a good question, and it is a really good one, is about kind of the distinction between off-road and on-road. So on-road are, predetermined points, but how off-road do you need to be for an off-road point count? How far from the nearest road is appropriate if you're picking a new one?
Ideally about 100 meters, because we want, a bit more would be better, but you want to be at least 100 meters from the road, because what we're trying to do is get you into a uniform patch of habitat. So if you're supposed to sample deciduous forest, and the roadside is probably not deciduous forest, it's just the edge. So you want to be at least 100 meters, ideally a little bit further, and make sure your off-road points are at least 300 meters apart. So in fact, ideally, I would say 150 meters away from the road. If you're going to do a bunch in a row, start 150 meters away, and then the next one at least 300 meters after that, so they're spread out. Our roadside point counts are spread out 500 meters, but it's easy to travel farther when you're driving. We're not forcing you to hike quite so far off-road.
That is fair. Another questions for a few people that are like not quite sure about whether or not they're up to doing point counts and whether or not their skills are, they're kind of maybe on that line. Can somebody, this might be, I'm not sure who would best answer this question, how can you determine whether or not it's appropriate for you to do a point count or not? I know that we have lots of resources for testing yourself that you can find on the Atlas website, so you can kind of figure that out, but is there any other advice that we can point them to?
I think a good guideline is when you're doing, do a practice point count and figure out how many of those songs that you hear do you not know what they are. If it's more than 1 or 2 on a point count, in fact, probably if it's, occasionally, if on average it's more than 1 or 2 on a point count, you're not ready yet, because you want to be able to do most of them. Everybody's going to have some weird song or weird call that they can't identify, but you want to be able to get it most of the time. And so it's sort of a good guideline. If there's a lot of point counts where there's 1 or more birds you can't identify, practice up some more. And that doesn't count the little thing that just shot across the road that you can't see. So it's mostly songs that we're concerned with. If you hear a lot of songs, you're not sure what they are, practice up a bit more. Now, hopefully when you're hopefully when you're sure you're right, that's a separate question. That's what you quiz yourself on.
A good point, everybody. This is why the testing functions are very good. It will tell you whether or not your confidence is founded or not.
Just one more thing on that. Be reassured that nobody gets them all right. When we listen to recordings, it's always a bit disconcerting that this expert called this one something or other and that expert called it something else. It's harder on a recording than in reality, But perfection's not necessary, but we do want to get a high percentage.
There's a number of questions that all kind of focus around this concept of noisy roadsides for point counts and how to determine whether a spot is just inappropriate or not. And one of those questions has to do with kind of point count advice in urban areas. Can somebody speak to that?
Few suggestions. If you're going to do, if your point count areas are in the middle of town, try and find, those are the ones to do at 5:30 in the morning before everybody else is up. Don't do them at 9 in the morning when the neighbors are mowing their lawn. If it's impossible to find a quiet time, because of busy traffic, then skip that point count and choose a different one. But it's pretty common that you can, do some of those urban ones really early in the morning because most people aren't up yet and the birds are. So that would be my suggestion. Choose your timing. We've got 5 years, especially if you're only doing 1 or 2 squares. If you're paid crew and you've got to do 20 squares in one summer, you do what you can, but they're usually up north. They're not in the urban areas. So that would be my suggestion. In terms of traffic, our guidelines, if there's continuous traffic, give up on that one. You won't be able to hear it. One thing we didn't mention in the Zoom, if a car goes by, we do ask you to extend the recording a little bit longer so we can try to get around that. There's guidelines as to how long. And if it's just continuous traffic, don't do a Zoom recording. The other thing we didn't mention, even slightest bit of drizzle, don't do a Zoom recording. Recorders don't like getting wet. We don't want to ruin the recorder. Very, very faint mist, you can probably do a in-person point count, but please don't get the recorders wet.
Good advice. Don Sutherland's got an interesting question here. I'm sure we all know, a lot of us know him, about what exactly constitutes a road. Like some roads are barely roads and are more tracks or trails. Where's the line between road and not road?
That's a good question. I would say a good definition is if it breaks the canopy. So, a forest track that, yes, you might be able to drive down it, but it doesn't break the canopy, the trees grow over it, then you can treat that as an off-road site. It probably won't, it's unlikely to have any randomly picked roadside point counts on it because those types of tracks usually aren't on our maps. Sometimes they are, and beware also, sometimes the maps have things that show us roads that actually aren't roads at all. They've overgrown. Once upon a time, they were a road. Again, those are good candidates for pick a different point count on the roadside.
That's good advice. I've definitely tried to drive down roads like that during surveys and then found myself just driving on nothing in a forest. So be careful, everybody. There's a lot of other questions. I am, cognizant of the fact that we only have, around 5 minutes left. So maybe we'll do one more and then we'll kind of end with some announcements from Kaylin and Mike and the team. Let's see. Oh, I found this kind of interesting. You have these detectability, analysis stuff set up for, a single point counter. How is it advisable to, point count in a team, or does that throw off your detectability because you have suddenly 2 people and more effort?
Generally, point counts are done by one person. That's absolutely strict rule on the breeding bird survey. I mean, you can have somebody else with you for a company, or if you're playing with a recorder while you're doing that, they do that while you do your breeding bird survey. But on Atlas, nothing wrong with having somebody with you, but the point count should be done by one person. We generally recommend against having one person doing the writing and one person doing the listening, because then you're talking all the time saying, oh, one of these, and it distracts. Especially never do that if you're actually recording at the same time, because we don't want to hear a recording of somebody talking. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with having somebody with you, but during the 5 minutes of the point count, should be one person doing it. Anything you want to add on that, Mike? I think that would be fairly standard. I don't think we mentioned that in the manual, but.
Right, yeah, it's a good question, but yes, I agree with what you said, Charles. We just want to go with one person per point.
And that's actually a good time, Mike, do you have any kind of general atlasing announcements, anything coming up, anything people should be looking for or thinking about before we end for the night?
Not really, just to thank everyone for coming along tonight. Thanks everybody, to Charles and to Rich in particular for their presentation tonight. Thanks for Emily for hosting, and Mike and Kaylin for being there for support in the background. I just reiterate about the COVID. We are in a pandemic and we are in a tight situation at the moment. Things will hopefully improve in the near future, but just be sure to follow the provincial guidelines on all your atlasing in the coming weeks. Hopefully June 2nd things will change and we can all get around with a clean conscience.
Yeah. A small comment, I just saw an interesting comment on the recordings. Yes, you can listen to the recordings after you've made them. And in fact, it's a really good idea to listen to at least the first one or two to make sure that it actually worked. I think the Zoom, I think forget whether it has a built-in speaker. I think it does, but it's also got a headphone jack. So most of you almost certainly have some sort of headphone. So plug that in. Listen to at least your first recording or two. When you hear all that crunch, crunch, crunch of the gravel under your feet, you'll realize, oops, no wonder people told me to stay still. But also just to make sure everything was working. It's a really good idea. And of course, somebody also asked, can you just record the odd bird when you're doing your point count and get somebody to check up on it afterwards? Yes, you can do that. I mean, if you just, and somebody asked about an iPhone, I wouldn't recommend right now the iPhone for doing digital recordings, but you can certainly use it. I'm not sure what that bird was, record it, ask somebody, and then you can add that to your, ID your points that way.
People have a lot of new options for learning their songs and calls these days. I think that, we have far more questions than we can possibly get to in 3 minutes. Let's do one more because we have 3 minutes and we're done announcements. I thought it was quite interesting that somebody asked about places where there are point count locations that might change, like maybe there's development or some sort of land use change that's about to take place there. Is that a case where somebody should maybe do a point count both pre and post, or would you prefer after or before? It does not matter.
I think we have some flexibility there. Do what you can. We'll have the date as long as we have the date. If you're only going to do your own square and you want to do point counts every year, we won't refuse the data. But again, our emphasis is particularly, not everybody's going to do point counts. We want to make sure the people who are good at doing point counts do as many squares as they can, not the same one over and over again. So in the grand scheme of things across the province, which is the scale we analyze this, a few new developments aren't going to change the results.
Okay, well, with that, everybody, thank you so much for coming. If you do have any burning questions that we didn't get to, you can look on the Breeding Bird Atlas website, and maybe you can also try posing some questions through the Atlas social media account. So you can find the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas 3 on Facebook, also on Instagram. And Kaylin, are you guys on Twitter too? I'm not sure if you are or not.
Yeah, we are. ON Bird Atlas on Twitter.
ON Bird Atlas. Normally I write these down first. Sorry about
No worries.
that. So lots of ways to get in touch with the Atlas, ask questions, interact if we didn't get to it tonight. And of course, you can save some questions for our next Sappy Hour as well. Mike, it looks like you have one more thing.
You just reminded me of our discussion board. Maybe Kaylin, do you want to mention a little bit about that? It's up and not being used much at this point, but this would be a great way to use it.
Yeah, I've just posted the link in the chat. It's birdsontario.org/community. It's also under the Get Involved tab. There's a discussion forum there, and you can pose your questions. There's kind of a just general overarching topics there, and you can go in there and pose questions as well.
Let's make sure to post that link onto the Facebook video comments as well, so people following along there can see it. So you can look in the video there and see a link to the discussion board where, we can talk about all of these things kind of virtually and digitally for as long as we like. But for tonight, I think that's it. We're a hard stop at 8 p.m. But thank you everybody so much for coming. That was a really great presentation. Lots to think about, especially since point count time is starting very soon. I'm excited for mine. And we'll see you at the next Sappy Hour, everybody. So thanks for joining and see you later. Bye.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yes.